Okay, everyone, we're going to call tonight's meeting to order. May 29th, 2025, it's Lansing Charter Review Committee. Can we please do the roll call, Grace?
Diane Gutierrez, Pam Wheel, Jonathan Foreman, Jeffrey Hink,
Present.
Veronica Wilkerson Johnson, Ruben Martinez,
Here.
Jill Rhodey, here, Dale Kurdoff,
Yeah.
Lynn Richardson. Here.
Thank you. Agenda item 1.2 is approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve? Second?
Or
Discussion? Did we put that to the vote? Yes, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same side. It's a little funny when you're up here, you actually gotta do it yourself. So forgive me if I, pause tonight. Okay, agenda item 1.3, approval of the minutes from the May 15th, 2025 meeting. Is there a second? Discussion? Seeing none, all those voting to approve, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Hearing none, moving on to agenda item 2.1, written communications from the packet.
can I assume that we're going to, because we've got the nice preamble discussion from Mayor Hollister, that we'll kind of save that till we get to the whiteboard section where we talk about preamble.
Any discussion on the communications from the written communications in the packet? Okay, agenda item 2.2, communication from the audience. Doesn't look like we have anyone here. So moving on to agenda item 2.3, communication from committee members. Anyone have anything they'd like to share? Okay, going once, going twice, hearing none. We move on to agenda item 3.1, public hearing. Tonight, there's a public hearing on proposed changes for chapters 15 to 20 and other proposed changes. Doesn't look like we have anyone here to
Just highlighting some quick.
so sure. So,
That's a less than helpful comment about format. Like if we narrow the columns and then expanded the description. Just because that, the rest of it is descriptions, so seems to be what matters, or what would it be of interest to our audience.
so sorry, this is chapters 15 through 20. So, this is page 14 of our agenda packet tonight. We can review some of this. We passed a resolution related to chapter 18, updating sections on alcoholic beverages, complying with current practices in the city. Passed a resolution on chapter 19, simplify sections regarding liability, city liability to align with state law. We have not passed a resolution yet on chapter 17, which is the library board, which is on tonight's agenda for further discussion.
So Jeff, what you're not looking at the attachment that had the list of our changes? Is that,
I'm just going through chapter 15 to 21. That's what the public hearing was for.
oh, okay.
We made any changes to chapter 16? In chapter 20, we have a change on the agenda tonight to add in a savings clause, but we have not voted on any changes so far. So, given that this is a public hearing, there's no one here for public, do we close the public hearing? Yes, it's done.
Did you mention 18 and 19?
I did. We started out with.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Do you want to have some discussion on there? Can we discuss that under
which is 30.
If you're going to do the public hearing, just open it first and then close it after public hearing.
Okay. I did open it, correct, and close it?
No, we haven't closed it. We got,
Oh,
You guys
So,
officially open.
yep, so we would take a vote then to close the public hearing.
You could just close it. I don't think you need to vote on it.
We don't need to vote on it.
No.
At this time, then we'll close the public hearing, seeing that there's no one here from the public to participate. If anybody's watching at home, we certainly invite you to come next time.
we're in communication.
Then communication in. Moving on to 4.1 on our agenda, which is continued discussions on section 3.4. That's page 15, 16 of tonight's agenda packet. This has to do with misconduct in office, adding in subsection about conviction of assault, battery, or domestic violence being creating a vacancy in office for elected officials. So it's point where we just move to discussion. This should run on both.
Motion and then discussion.
Okay, so
Motion and a second.
move to approve resolution for tonight.
I'll support.
I don't know if I'm supposed to be the chair.
You can.
I'll move to. Support discussion.
It's a little, that was my thought, however,
Two of these were both driven by Jonathan, but I did send both of these to him and amended them as he thought was necessary, just so you know, but that's totally at your discretion.
that's what I was gonna say, because we've had a couple discussions, and I do think this represents, but Chair, would there be any problem in holding this?
I would ask how everybody else feels about it. If we think that we're vote would change, if anyone else was here, if we feel we want to move forward. And Diane gave me instruction to kind of keep us on task. So if we want to vote on stuff tonight, get it off the plate, let's do it. But if you feel someone should, if anyone feels anyone else should be here to participate, I have no issue to hold it table to the next meeting.
Yeah, if I just have a comment about that, and I'm concerned because we've had this discussion repeatedly throughout about misconduct in office. I'm wondering if this is one that we ought to postpone until towards the end, so that it's like one of the last things we vote on, so that if there's anything else that needs to be collected under this, we're not foreclosing any opportunity to further amend 3.4. I would hate to have Tony or anyone have to go back and add language, and then we have to go through the exercise of moving to amend our amendments, and just a suggestion.
Yeah, I strongly support that, because I do recall a discussion about other places where misconduct is mentioned in the charter. Is that correct, Jeff? Because it seems like there were other places that refer to misconduct, and we were going to do a refer back.
Sorry.
So maybe it does make sense to cross-reference it with all of the other occurrences of misconduct.
So Tony, what is listed here in terms of limited sections, is that exhaustive of where misconduct is mentioned in the document?
As the document currently sits, as far as showing a violation, there's one more reference, but it's not stating violation of this section is misconduct in office. So the answer is yes. And then we put in the provision, including but not limited to, in case there was a further offense that it would still be encompassed, even though it wasn't specifically enumerated.
And did Jonathan make any changes to his?
Not to this particular resolution. He did make some changes to item 4.4 that I'll explain.
So you heard back from him?
Yes.
Oh, so this is kind of put in front of him. And he
Yeah, I did send both of these to him and received feedback
On
on
the
the one of them. Yep.
He's had an opportunity to review it, and I think his silence then implies approval of how it's worded. Is that how we should read it?
That was my understanding. Yes.
Okay.
What's the downside of tabling it to this back?
Sorry?
What's the downside of tabling it to this back? Because this is his like.
Yeah, not getting it done, I think, because it should go quick.
So tell me, I might have missed something here, but in terms of the procedure, as we get to the last meeting, and that's coming up, I would assume, that, are you going to essentially send the package to city council? So you will have one more chance to make any changes to any of the proposed ballot language at that point in time? Is that,
That's the intent.
so you could actually just defer this to the last meeting or whatever, whenever that's going to be. And at that point in time, if Jonathan has anything to say about it, you can do that, and so can the rest. Because I don't know what you want to do, but that's one way of it.
My issue is he's changed it so many times. That's why I'd like him to see it one more time before we approve it. That's my own.
But even if we approve it, we still have an opportunity to amend it. But it's not like set in stone.
Well, that's true. So if we pass it, we open them back up.
I believe someone could move to reopen, reconsider.
Or you can indicate that you're satisfied with it right now, and then move it to the last meeting when you're going to go through all these all over again.
We really only have 2 meetings left that are scheduled, June 12th and June 26th. June 26th are last, just something in public hearing minutes, so. Thought the last meeting was sort of like, extra ideas people have had that we haven't addressed, the whiteboard concept, and then we have other business done by then generally. June 12th. So I'm hearing kind of mixed messages. One is that we think Jonathan's okay with this. No one else would probably object to this language. But we could vote on it and approve it. And if someone doesn't like it, they can move to reopen it, or we can just table it. Postpone
Well, we
it
can vote on it and
to the end.
not vote to move it to issues.
Is there a consensus? Everyone?
Vote with us the consensus.
So we vote to vote to whether we're going to vote on this tonight.
No, we just vote whether or not we're going to move it as written.
Well, we need a motion.
Does someone want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to vote.
Yeah, I'll second. Discussion? Okay. That was
Mr. Sales.
No, all those in favor of the motion as
Yeah, all
written?
those in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion passes.
So we're going to ask this.
Motion.
Jeffrey.
Yeah,
Oh,
Well, no, so I
I
think
seconded the motion.
okay, okay. I didn't hear that.
Okay. Okay, moving on to agenda item 4.2, continue discussion on proposed changes to section 6.2, which is contained within pages 17 and 18 of tonight's agenda pack. Yes, sorry, what's that, Pam?
you're gonna move it,
Move to.
this resolution,
Sure,
and I'll support it. That was-
yes, any discussion?
I guess I'm confused by the wording, violates its provisions and shall not exceed the maximum penalty permitted by state law. For the punishment of those who violate its provisions, not to exceed the maximum penalty by state law, right? That's. Council should provide in each ordinance that prohibits or requires any act for the punishment of those who violate its provisions not to exceed the maximum penalty permitted by state law. Right, and it currently says, who violate its provisions and shall not. Or is it, oh, I see, okay, so they're saying there's gotta be a punishment. And that punishment cannot exceed state law.
And you might think that about the fact that you're using 2 different words to describe the same thing. You might want to instead say something like, shall provide for the punishment of those who violate its provisions and which shall not exceed the maximum penalty permitted by law.
That makes sense to me. Yeah. Yeah, so we're saying there's gotta be a penalty and that penalty can't exceed. So it's two pieces.
I think it's clear for the ordinary person who's. Right, it's confusing because it has two different words that describe the same.
Any other thoughts or discussion on that?
I think the those changes a good one. I find it kind of awkward.
So friendly amendment?
I don't-
No, not you. A friendly amendment? For Mark's change? And
Yes,
then we can vote on it with the friendly amendment.
make the motion for friendly.
I would move that those changes, did we capture those changes? Can we get them read back?
So 6.2 was, from my understanding, would read, the council shall provide in each ordinance that prohibits or requires any act for the punishment of those who violate its provisions, which shall not exceed the maximum penalty permitted by state law.
No, wait. Okay.
It's just changing at the end.
Which,
Oh, and for which, yes, yeah, okay, perfect. Okay, I move that friendly amendment. Is there a second?
Discussion?
This is moving, so this is a motion to pass it with friendly
Yeah.
amendment.
All those in favor?
Those, no discussion, so all those in favor say aye.
Right.
Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Moving on to 4.3, continued discussion, proposed changes to chapter 17, which is contained in pages 19 to 21 of tonight's agenda packet. Someone want to make a motion? So I'll make a motion to recommend changes to chapter 17 of the East Lansing City Charter. Property that-
Yeah, just, I know Tony forwarded this proposed resolution to the library director. I don't know if their board has met and reviewed and provided feedback. I thought that was the goal that was recommended last time we met. I don't know if you heard anything back from them.
They met last night. This was my understanding, but I didn't hear back today from the director, so this one,
May not be ready for the.
we may want to
Yeah, everyone's comfortable.
but there was, it's still worth conversation because we did have a lot of changes, so if these changes don't accurately reflect, I wouldn't be surprised. So you can bring that up and I can try to make those changes as well.
Any other discussion? 17. Will we move to postpone then or table to the next meeting? I can move that without a vote.
No, we'll vote on that in a second.
Okay, I would move to vote to table, consider defer consideration of the resolution to chapter 17 until next meeting. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. The same sign. Okay, moving on to agenda item 4.4, continued discussion on proposed changes to chapter 20, which is contained in pages 22 and 23 of tonight's agenda packet.
So this one, there was a change made by Jonathan, and I just realized we were going back and forth on it, and where it says or ordinance in all caps, that was how he was showing his changes, so that's not intended to be in all caps. Sorry, that says.
We would move to recommend changes to chapter 20 of the East Lansing City Charter. Is there a second
Oh, I'll second, but I've got a discussion.
discussion?
Did we talk about putting some kind of and I don't think it belongs here honestly, but there was some discussion about saying within 60 days, like, but then we talked about how we're trying to work as fast as we can to get the charter updated and reflect ordinances and like Prop 1. So I would think that that might be something we would want to maybe not put in the charter, and I'll support this as written, but something to consider
Yeah,
so that we,
I think once that office is staff stabilizes, a lot of this will happen.
right, and maybe it's a preamble or maybe it's, but I think this covers any concern people would have with enforcement.
Yeah, and this is solely related to
Yeah.
enforcement.
Right.
That one may come into transparency or something like
Right.
that. I'm not sure exactly where, but yeah, but I don't think it's in this particular.
Right, and I think this really addresses the actual concerns, the concrete concerns, that it's not being passed on to the staff or that somehow that we haven't responded to the ordinances.
Saving clause, is that a term of art? I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, it's a-
Read and report.
Yeah, it's a legal term of art. And so when I looked through Michigan statutes, this is how it's all, and through pretty much every contract you would read, this is how it's stated. And so because of the legal significance of it, I think it's important to keep it with that name. And the practical significance is something that I think is implied in everyone's head, which is if I violate a law today, it's changed tomorrow, which thereby repeals that law, it's amended, then going to enforce it the following day, I would have a defense that the law that I was charged under has been repealed, it's therefore unenforceable. And that's all that this says, is that it continues to be enforceable for the period that it was in force. And so I don't think a lot of people that read it will actually understand it by the language, but it's just very consistent with Michigan law and how you would have the technical language.
And if you look at some of our ordinances, they're a package, so to speak, and if somebody challenges one provision, so 52-1, and the court says it's unconstitutional, a savings clause lets the rest of that ordinance remain in place, even though that one is gone, instead of just blowing out the entire thing. So this way, if some part of this charter is declared unconstitutional, the rest of it continues.
Don't have a question. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sure. Oh, and I was just gonna say, when we talked about it, I also did kind of review other charters from our charter's time period, and all of them have it. I mean, so that was just an oversight by the original drafters. It was in the model charter at that time. So I don't know what the reason was for it being missing.
Is it always standalone?
Remember a time where, so this is only applies to city ordinances or some charter, it would apply to state law, for example.
Yeah, it has no effect on that.
Okay, so,
And it also has the ability, sorry, of council, so this is presumed if council passes an ordinance that it applies just like I talked about, but it does give the option for council to pass one and say this doesn't apply. And so it would render, they would say this ordinance renders the preceding ordinance ineffective, period. And so it doesn't take that authority away from them also.
that was about, my question was basically going to be a retroactive nature. If something were meant to be like remedial, you don't want to punish someone for past that last sentence.
Unless
Like
they
the amendment expressly, that's kind of like
that's what that's for.
preserves the ability to do that. Okay.
Yep, absolutely.
I'm comfortable with it.
Yeah, and so like in that, so a recent circumstance you would think about is when our city council passed the ordinance about certain criminal violations not being a primary, an acceptable primary stop for traffic or for enforcement by our law enforcement officers. That's one where they likely, again, this doesn't apply, but they would likely say, we do want to render that void immediately or make this effective immediately, and therefore it would render prior stops that were prohibited under the new ordinance to be invalid.
If they were still pending.
Correct, yes.
Yes.
But
Clear your
that's
make sure.
not a good example. That's not a good example because no one prosecuted for the minor stop. They're prosecuted for what happens, what they find when you pull someone over. So it's never going to be, right, it's never going to be like, you're going to say, well, that wasn't a valid, I shouldn't have been pulled over in the first place. And then retroactively, the city says, yes, you shouldn't have been. But anyway, that's not there's no crime. So we're not saying it was illegal to, it was, I don't know, it was legal to rent this space, but now we made egress window laws changed and the space is no longer legal to rent. Then do you have to get the renter out? Is it, you know? Do we, yeah. That's,
So for my ratification, tell me what the first sentence means and then what the second sentence.
So our first sentence is referencing if the charter or any ordinance passed pursuant to this charter is amended at any time, it shall not impair or affect any act done, offense committed, or right accruing, accrued, or liability, penalty, forfeiture, or punishment incurred prior to the date, or I'm sorry, to the time the amendment takes effect. And so that's what I was referencing, is that you could have a defense that if I violated a law that was in effect today, and prior to my prosecution, I don't want to keep using me, I'm going to say something else. But
Now keep going.
but so if then prior to the prosecution, the ordinance is amended and it makes whatever that person did to no longer a violation, it would still be a violation if we implement this provision.
you continue the prosecution or the fine.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay, that's how I read it.
Yep. And so that,
It allows a frozen in time.
Yeah.
Anything prior is still invalid.
Yeah.
Unless we put change.
and then the second one, any violation of the language of the charter or ordinance prior to that amendment may be asserted, enforced, prosecuted, or inflicted as fully and to the extent as if the amendment had not been passed unless the amendment expressly provides to the contrary. And so that's just the opposite of it, to explicitly allow prosecution for the violation. It's saying the same thing, but from two different sides. It's saying a violation of a law that gets changed, if it was a violation at the time, is still a violation, and prosecution of it, even if it changes, if it was still a violation on that date, is still permitted.
But Tony, can you explain inflicted?
Yes.
Because the other terms I can understand and are appropriate. I'm not sure where the inflicted comes.
So this was language directly from the state savings clause. And I think they just try to be as wide as possible when you try to look at the violation, if it was potentially something, you know, if it was a law that was changed that was civil in nature, that potentially gave the city a right to file in civil court, or because you have to look at it from a civil or criminal aspect. And so it's trying to be as wide ranging as possible. Coming up with an exact example of inflicted, can't do that right now, but it's just trying to be as wide as possible.
And we're doing this only because it was absent in the charter.
Correct.
Blame this to citizens to get them to vote for it. That sounds like it's a big way.
That'll come down to the ballot language, and we've got 100 words to try to explain this. It's going to be complicated, but it's important. I think it's really important to the charter and the sanctity of the document. Sure. 100 words, I don't know.
You know, it just seems like
Yeah.
it's going.
It's a little bit, it's definitely, I mean, to say the city wants to amend the charter to allow prosecution violations of ordinances that subsequently are modified.
If I did it yesterday, I can be prosecuted. If I do it today, I can't.
If the law changes in between, yes.
But I think the bigger message is if any portion of the charter is stricken by the court as being unconstitutional, the rest of the charter still stands.
Yeah, I just.
Yeah, and that,
I mean, that's probably more of the.
yeah, and that goes, we have a separate severability clause that directly impacts this also can impact that though, which is also in chapter 20.
Okay, but where is that?
Yeah, I'm not hearing that.
So that's in that.
Yeah, well, what I see is the event and the prosecution. We don't see that.
This relates all to amendment to our motion, not a court action.
20.2 is kind of, I read that as severability section.
Yeah, 20.2 is the
But it
severability.
doesn't use that. I mean, that's what first thing popped in my head. You would have the word severability.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, I was just looking at the charter change. One question I have is, there was discussion about having a provision that's related to the history of what we have removed from the charter, because up until now, we kind of left it in there. That's not part of this. Is that part of a different ballot proposal?
Can you, I'm sorry, provision in the charter that said what?
Yeah, there was a discussion here, you know, whether we do this or not is a different thing, but there was a discussion here about, you know, removing certain provisions that had remained in the charter. So there were sections for that originally talked about the election of a magistrate. That provision stayed in here, not the language, but the reference to the provision. We're going to put that as part of you know, that thing that listed these things that have been clearly removed from the charter, including the schedule, which is going to be gone now too. And had stayed in here since 1946 or whatever. So,
So this might, because you're saying this might be in the area where we refer to
it would seem like.
the section, yeah, miscellaneous includes modifications, a log of modifications.
Just a reference to the modification.
Yeah.
I had that in my notes as well.
Up to miscellaneous section.
Miscellaneous, that we had a section 20.5 that talked about the sections that were.
So how we currently do it, if you, is by footnotes, just referencing when things were changed, but it doesn't say, it doesn't give any context to what the changes were. So I think we could do that, but I just would need to understand exactly, like if we were referencing that a section was removed, what would it reference specifically?
Well, I think that's part we talked about, because we're rechanging all the numbering. Like we talked about, because so we do have empty sections and things like that. We talked about cleaning all those up. Yeah.
And I think too, you know, chapter 8 was municipal court. Well, that's like blank. We want to repurpose chapter 8. We don't want to lose the history. It used to be municipal
Right.
court and why it transitioned out from our charter because of changes in state law. Right? Creation of the district
I
court.
just want to make sure, so I, for just like purpose of drafting.
Say, where did this change? Like, can I refer to why this, when I look at this, it's different than it was in another version?
We have an appendix.
Yeah, I thought we were talking about like a.
Yeah,
That's a good idea. Yeah.
the section in 20 would say, as noted in the appendix, these changes were made. Or
Historical
numbering,
changes.
right.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just this time.
Yeah, where historical changes get found.
Yeah, so, and I don't think we would necessarily have to do that as an actual amendment to the charter, like some
Just have
Some
an
communities have like a forward, it's not really a part of the charter, but it's kind of just for a reader, yeah, to have a quick reference where they'll say, chapter 6.8 has been invalidated by Michigan election law. Chapter 6.9 is invalidated by, you know, then whatever it might be. And so for the appendix, I think we could do the same thing where it's not formally adopted because it will be changed from time to time. And you would then say chapter 8 was previously municipal court in 2025. The voters moved to change it to transparency, whatever it is. Yeah.
And that would only happen after it's been approved by the voters.
Oh, yes.
The actual
So we're
modification.
just talking about something that should be done after
It's a house.
the election. That's
Well,
how.
and that's what I just my concern about it is just if you look at some of our footnotes. So we had amendments in 97, 2 in 97, 1 in 2003, 2005, 2015, and 2017 and 2018. And so I don't have the documentation to make that amendment.
Okay, I didn't get the impression that they were talking about anything that. I thought that they were talking about just simply having a section that talked, for instance, the original chapter 8, which related to municipal court, was repealed 11/4/97. The original chapter 9, which was supervisors, was repealed on 11/5/68. I mean, all that information is here. Right now, we leave those sections open and then we have a footnote that goes with them. If we're going to remove those, we can have them just in a section. That's really all I was thinking. They were talking about those things which had a section number, but have now been repealed or.
We may, yeah, and I think we certainly have records in the clerk's office to that would indicate that. So I can try to, so where do we want to put that then? Do we want to do it as 20.5 or do we want to do it as an appendix that is not a part of the document? Just for drafting purposes.
I think from a voter's perspective, they wouldn't need to vote on that, we can just do it.
Yeah, it doesn't have any actual number.
Idea of the appendix, we wouldn't have, that the voters wouldn't have to do, but it's a way of making the charter more clear for people who are coming to read it, since that's one of our goals.
And the next time we call the charter. Get rid of the state of James.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I was limited to, these things we removed. Because
The new things.
they find to have 10.1, for instance, a reference at the bottom of the page talking about how many times it's meant. That's the normal of any. As long as it still exists within the charter.
But the ones that are repurposed, we should articulate that, yeah.
Well, then are we only repurposing chapter 8?
Okay, now and also
Well,
9 was supervisor.
yeah, 9 is supervisors, but that was repealed, but we aren't substituting anything in there.
So that's gonna stay
So there was
blank.
discussion last time about moving, not making it chapter 8, or maybe give it as 2 or 3.
I think that.
But maybe before,
Right.
could we, should we deal with what the savings clause that's in front of us right now? Are we getting off track on the discussion or?
Yeah, that's the point. We already have the part.
Okay, so, the resolution to recommend change to chapter 20 is to the charter. I believe there was a motion and a second. Had discussion. So all those in favor, say aye.
More discussion.
Sure.
Is this wording required? Could clear wording be substituted? Clear wording? I mean, are we going to explain to the voters that this is mandated legal wording to, and this doesn't, as Mark said, I don't see this saying anything. Oh, we've got the other clause in 20.
We've got,
Okay, so this is gonna come in at a whole page of miscellaneous.
that's just an add-on to the existing.
So this wording is mandated.
I would say yes, because it's in state law, it's been reviewed by courts as to its meaning. And again, the voters, in every precinct, if this was the precinct, we would have the language of the charter amendment on the wall for anyone to look at, but your ballot itself will not have it. It will have very much layman's explanation of what this means.
Okay, oh, I hear that. Okay, that's, okay.
One other comment, we call it the savings clause. To me, 20.2 is the savings clause. This is, and what we have there is the title is effective illegality on any part of the charter. This is effective amendment to any ordinance in the city of East Lansing. So I'm wondering whether calling it savings clause tells people.
Yeah, and like I said, that it's just referenced like that in state law, but that would be, if you wanted to make it consistent with 20, try to
20.2.
use language of 20.2 effective modification or repeal of any ordinance or charter provision. That would be like an alternative title.
We can change that heading, we can change that heading without vote, right?
No, I mean, we should still have a vote on approval with that change, if that's what we want to do.
Regarding 20.4, is there any further discussion on the resolution? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign.
I oppose it, so not pass.
No, I believe we passed. We
I'm
have
gonna
a
oppose it.
majority vote.
Yeah, majority vote and members present is,
I want to stop it, but I want to support it.
Okay, moving on to agenda item 4.5, continued discussion on transparency chapter, which is somewhat what we were just talking about with chapter 8. That discussion can continue here. Before we could get into some language, we do not have draft language in the agenda packet tonight. I understand as Tony might be working on.
yeah, and that's, I apologize. I went through my notes in my email. I didn't have notes about this change. And so I'll bring this forward for the next council or the next committee meeting.
Seeing that we've had a lot of discussion on this, we don't have draft language, and missing 3 members, and everyone seems to like to talk about this. Would this be sort of consensus to the other committee members that maybe we defer for the discussion on transparency till the next meeting?
Well, Jeff, just to decide if you would take a look at the kind of pared down B version and see if what it's not covering from version that you proposed as well. So if there is, because we inserted something in the last discussion, I think really addressed one of the issues, but
Well, I thought we sort of did merge it a little bit.
Yeah, no, I know we did.
That's what will hopefully come out of
yeah,
Tony's draft for the next meeting.
I just want to make sure where you're feeling something's missing and
Well, I'll wait for Tony to send the draft around, and hopefully the next meeting we can finally get down to the vote and get something that everybody is happy with. So, is there any further discussion on agenda item 4.5?
But is that going to be a new chapter or a little differently from?
Dr. Martinez, last couple meetings, we talked about whether it would be chapter 8 or whether this would be moved to chapter 2 or 3 even. And there was a proposed title. I'm sorry. I don't think
That's
so.
okay.
It's in front of me.
I think it was transparency and public active records. And then we did that as proposed chapter 3. One thing that I did is I reached out to, I believe is the new individual in the Attorney General's office that's going to handle these, but I didn't hear back as to whether this change would be required to go before voters. That solely the piece that relates to renumbering, because that's going to be really complicated to explain in the ballot question, and it doesn't have any operative meaning, right? And so I need to figure out exactly what we can do, or at the very least, say, just have a general question saying, City Council proposes to renumber the charter in order to bring the transparency chapter to the beginning, rather than a very detailed reading of our requirement to have each topic brought before the voters. So we would say chapter 2 tax needs to be moved to chapter 3. Chapter 3 and go all the way through. That would make it so tedious.
was done
Yeah.
for clarity.
Yeah, and like that's how it should be if we needed at all.
And did you get feedback?
She did not respond yet, so I may have the wrong person, but I will find who it is.
You have a note from Diane just about the transparency chapter that she had wanted to go around the room and ask everyone what they thought should be in there. So if anybody does want to talk about it, go ahead. Seems like we did maybe sort of did that last meeting. Dr. Martinez wasn't here. I don't have the draft language, but she had also mentioned that Dr. Martinez had the emails from former Lansing Mayor Hollister dealing with the preambles and other concepts that she wanted to get everyone's thoughts on. So I don't know if that's really maybe appropriate under this agenda item, or do we add on an agenda item at the end after 4.6 to discuss later? Regarding the agenda tonight.
We can still amend the agenda, but so it's at your discretion.
Okay.
I do really, we did have substantial changes that'll be reflected on in the next draft of chapter 8 at the next meeting. So I think the conversation could be centered around that to make sure that this are all accurate.
I think what Diane might have been getting to with Dr. Martinez would be whether transparency ties to a preamble or not, or there's a discussion of that tonight, or again, we just want to refer that to the what we asked the text.
We all want it to be something. Well, we agree on, I think we want it to be part of the document, that's your too. Where it all is. Yeah.
That one or two meetings ago, just in the agenda packet. Martinez, do you have any comments on any of that?
No, I think, this was submitted just as an example of a preamble, since we had talked about having a preamble. And whether it's part of transparency or not, it's a definitional. Mostly from the preamble. What would a preamble look like?
Yeah, I agree. I think we talk about running a preamble, but I don't think that is anything to not having a transparency section. Sure.
I think there's some.
Yeah.
Okay. Bill, are you working on anything, or do you want any more discussion on transparency?
I think Greg sent this May 15th. Is that right? Hollister's language.
Yeah, we was this.
Yeah, it was printed too. For everyone to that.
You have that?
Yes, I do.
I was, I put 1 and 2 at your seat with the 2 things that we did last week. The whiteboard and the copy.
So are you going to discuss this?
I think the preamble is one of those things that was on our whiteboard for next meeting of last week as well.
I'll just note that
Done with the liquor.
his comment with regard to the strategic plan. Generally speaking, the council does that. We do that every 2 years. This is a strong mayor form of government approach to the strategic plan.
And so I read this too as, you said that the city manager report is kind of rolled into that, right? The city manager's report includes current, but also plans for the future. Right, that's, and we talked about that requirement, and that is an articulated requirement of the role of the city manager.
Correct.
Which seemed like that's a similar, that's kind of version of this that we have.
Updates with regard to strategic priorities, Robert, it's on a regular basis. And we also, when we do the budgets, there's sort of connection to the strategic priorities as part of the implementation.
Now, does the council have an opportunity to modify that report and the plans? How does that work?
We create strategic priorities, the council does,
Ah,
not
okay,
staff.
okay.
I mean, staff has input,
Sure.
obviously, because that is strategic priority that nobody can do. At least we hope we don't do that. And then carrying out those priorities is why we get the regular report as to the progress. Some things are easy to progress, some things are not so easy to progress, some things often sort of don't get the legs that you hope they would, just simply because circumstances.
You're not.
Strategic plan, is that the flyer, whatever that you're talking about, the calendar that kind of lays out the city?
No, that would be the CIP, I would think. That's our,
Capital improvement plan does.
and it's a 5-year plan reported by state home.
So-
And that tells what we plan on doing the following year. Also what we ought to do in the future. Strategic priority tends to be more about establish a charter committee
Sure.
and to revise the charter after 30 years of not revising it, or creating a financial health team, which we talked about.
And is that published annually or is that something?
So it's- The last one we did it, we do it for 2 years because council gets, there's an election every 2 years. So the strategic priority is set up for a 2-year period. So we did one in January of 24 and went for 24 and 25. We'll do one again in January of 26.
And then that's published in a meeting packet or?
Yeah, and it's approved by council at a formal meeting. And
So
then-
that's, so that's.
Then it's on our website.
Kind of put it
Yeah.
forward and they review and revise.
Right, so they create it.
That's, yeah, that's.
Yeah, we do it a little bit different now. When we first started doing this, I think the first time we did it was in 96. And we made a bigger deal out of it, frankly, maybe because it was the first time, but each council member then had the responsibility to monitor a section like the environment or improving the environment or neighborhoods or something like that. Recently, we just, the staff makes a presentation as to what the components are, and then the city council. After we've had a number of meetings where we actually create.
Oh, yeah, because when I was on the parks board, we do that for the parks. And then I wasn't sure how to put it.
Any other further discussion on agenda item 4.5, transparency?
Whiteboard. A lot of the things on this whiteboard, they're part of this preamble or the separate report we're doing to council with this general recommendations.
I think that we're gonna discuss it and decide what we do want to kind of maybe there was a place to put like, oh, we'll just write a letter, we recommend ordinances around these issues or something.
Right.
If everybody votes to do that, so if it's just.
Okay, but that's what the thought is we either
That's
vote
my
the
understanding.
preamble, or we decide that we don't think elections should be at churches, that we would write a letter to the,
Right,
saying we
right.
recommend.
Now, that's my motion,
Understand.
but if everybody agrees, that would be included in our recommendation.
Yes, okay.
I think too, any of these could be another charter. Maybe something to too, so.
That's why they're kind of part there.
Okay, but we've also,
Come back.
I guess I feel like my thought is we've decided they're not gonna be charter amendments, they are going to. All right,
I think, I thought they were just in the bin.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there were a couple of that
Sorting things here.
referencing them early on just because we were addressing the charter numerically and there was a recognition that they had kind of far-reaching effects and were in multiple chapters. And so those were also put in to see, okay, once we've reviewed the whole charter, what do we do?
It'll be your last chance to propose anything that you want to put before the council, maybe put before voters, put your thinking caps on for that. So it sounds like we're moving on to agenda item 4.6, continue discussion on section 625, which is compilation. Copies of the code of the city of East Lansing, copies of the resolutions of the council, copies of this charter as amended shall be prepared and made available to members of the public. View at City Hall and the city library during business hours. The city shall provide and sell additional copies of the code of the city of East Lansing resolution to the council at cost.
Chapter 8
Yeah.
replaces this
Correct.
in its entirety.
So yeah, what was the thinking on this? If anyone had, does anyone advocating for change here? Are we,
I've got it. My note says we moved it to chapter 8. Is that what?
Essentially, it's fully incorporated within it.
So it's eliminated
Yeah, so
from further teaching.
I'll have to figure out how to deal with that amendment, whether we show that we're striking 6.5 and replacing it with 8 as part of one proposal, because you wouldn't want, presumably you wouldn't want the voters to agree to strike 6.5 and then fail to adopt chapter 8, because you're really moving quite backwards from your intent. So, so we'll put that into one proposed amendment presented. So.
I thought there was some discussion also about physical copies being made available versus electronic copies. Because you don't have the code in a physical look anymore than infers. I mean, it's electronic.
So the library does have, and then there's legacy hard copies in the basement. It's,
The issue of the code of oh, that's right, yeah. The code of ordinance is not updated in the physical book anymore. It's all done.
we're not getting a printed copy for.
Right, and so there was discussion, should we be printing one for the clerk's office and one for the library? For those that prefer that method versus searching online.
Well, you will provide the hard copy. And then I'm sure that the library could show me how to print the copy of the page that I'm looking at if I.
they may not provide a hard copy, and may point you to the fact that it's on the.
No, but I can print my
Yeah, that's all.
computer at the library. And so if I say I want a hard copy, the library will help me print those pages that I want.
Print it out.
Yeah.
But the procedure for, say, a FOIA request for a specific provision often is you go and you decide whether you want a copy or not. We do have people who come in, review the actual document
I'll take
and
it.
say, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
Which is also permitted under FOIA. So, not sure about not having some hard copies available at some point, because that may actually prevent copying loss. If somebody just has a question in their mind about how that language works, and they, instead of asking for a copy, having to have somebody go pull it and then make a copy of it and then charge potentially somebody for it by having a hard copy. Say, you can go to the library or you can come to the clerk's office. If you want to look through these, they're available.
They're computed.
Then you can do it on.
Yeah, but at the library, so I don't have a computer myself. I can go to the library and scroll through it at a computer at the library. Or maybe a computer at the clerk's office.
I think that should be on the whiteboard.
Yeah.
That there may be additional training in the library to access public records. Something like that.
Right now, they think they're ready to do it. They're all into it. So I talked to the woman that's coordinating, the librarian that's in charge. There's going to be there is like a City of East Lansing section. And like they've already catalog entry the charter and the ordinances. They are looking forward to digital, they seem to be all into it.
It's one other thing we didn't have, we didn't have a community center the last time we did change. So all this predates us having a community center, which is another physical location where we could have access. And more likely where people might think,
Oh, no, get on the front desk, but there's a lot of jobs, but anyway.
well, I just make sure that we have a spot.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
Yeah, I think that the discussion really should center on those persons who are not technically or technologically competent to be able to access anything, and just have a hard copy available at the clerk's office and a hard copy over at the library provided by the city. And if they want a copy of a certain page, that can be done. But some people simply are not technologically competent or cannot see whatever. And I think that's what we should be talking about. It's like making it available for those persons, residents, citizens of East Lansing that want to read the document.
When you say it, what are we talking about? Are we talking the city charter and the ordinances? And that's it. We're not talking about providing hard copies of the weekly agenda or the agenda packets and stuff.
No, I don't think so.
I just think it would behoove us then to be
Explicit.
explicit in either chapter 8 or in chapter 5 as to what, so that we have consistent expectations. I don't disagree that I think that there are people in the community that would prefer to read a hard copy than something online. But if we're going to do that, then to say copies of the city charter and the city code of ordinances, and I don't know what else there might be something else that we would want to include. And that would be hard copies would be available for review at 2 or 3 places.
If it's approved on Tuesday, it's gonna be put in this notebook on Friday.
Those pages could be updated.
It's gonna have to be done every meeting.
Well, every time an ordinance changes, there should be a cascade of updates and changes. That can
Right,
be
and
the
if
case.
that's why I say if it's limited to the charter and the code, then maybe that's what we put hard copies of, and we don't include council's agenda or the agendas of the boards and commissions or anything on that. If somebody's interested in that, then they will have to print out their own hard copy. But that's why I think we need to be explicit in what we say is going to be available at City Hall, the library, and Hannah.
And that is one of the reasons I wanted to make sure the library was in the mix, because they have the staffing and the desire to assist. And it's really not that much different than the kind of help they're giving people using the computers, printing their consumer report lists of washers. You know, it's the kind of help they're used to providing.
I thought that if you, in the transparency provision, there is a requirement that on an annual basis, whether it's in the dialogue or the annual dialogue or whatever, that you tell people how they can find this.
Yes.
Because it may be intuitive for attorneys to think, oh, the clerk must have this. Because if you go on our website, if you're just coldly looking for the ordinances for the city, you're not thinking you're going to click on the clerk and then click on ordinances or charter in order to look at those. So having a little guideline, so on an annual basis, so people know where they can look, that also could eliminate a lot of where. So it might be something you want to plug in.
I have a question regarding resolution. What's the frequency of modifications by the council?
Well, that's a really good question, because I think about my own sort of personal beef, but over the last maybe 6 years, there's been a sort of a move to designate things as policy resolutions that are not policy resolutions. You don't make changes that impact how the operation goes. It might be even something like no mow May, comes up as a policy resolution. Not about policy, it's just a suggestion that if you want to let your grass grow for 30 days, be my guest.
But then we have to name an ordinance.
We don't have to enforce that ordinance at any point in time. We don't need official to do that. We can tell staff that.
I mean, I like it, because I want it to be official. I don't want it to be like my neighbor knows they can now put their trash out.
Oh, no, there would still have to be action.
Oh, the council will have to.
But our resolutions under the charter are divided into resolutions and policy resolutions. Should be something a lot different. So the policy resolution that governs how the council operates, that's a policy resolution. And that has been amended maybe 3 or 4 times. I think the first time I saw one, I think we did it like in the late 90s, and then it's been amended a few times. It talks about how we set up the council, how liaison assignments are made, what the responsibilities are. None of this is in ordinance. It's all in the policy. but it governs. And so I think that's what a policy resolution talks about, governing, not necessarily sort of day-to-day activities or something. So, I guess I guess I lost my train of thought, and that was kind of long-winded anyway, but the, policy resolutions themselves, some of those are still in existence that clearly we are not following in terms of how we do things, because the world has changed and, you know, they've become outdated. We need to repeal those at some point as well, because they are out there with a number on them, 1997-6 or whatever. And so there's some work that's done with regard to those resolutions. And I think we can make it clearer in the charter, the difference between a resolution, an ordinary resolution, and a policy resolution.
So that would be helpful, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've also passed things, you know, at times. We try to stay out of federal business, but, you know, occasionally we feel because it impacts us directly, as a resolution opposed to, you know, a statute that might be proposed for something that would impact us adversely. That's not a policy resolution. That's just a resolution.
Yeah, the first policy resolution is 1964-1, selling bulk water. It says bulk water for filling swimming pools, large tanks, or similar uses will be provided from fire hydrants as a service to citizens.
Well, that's nice to.
Still,
We do need to work on it.
That's still in effect.
No, they adopted an ordinance that reversed on that. No.
So how often are ordinances modified?
you know, probably, well, I think, you know, we're always looking at the ordinance. And whatever effect we might have, we'll find out in court or, you know, as part of a prosecution, which find out it's more difficult under certain language than another language will change it. And a lot of the changes that we've made, I think in the last few years anyway, have sort of built on existing ordinances with amendments. And so they're amended often, really. And then on the website, you'll see there's the Muni code. And then there's a specific provision for ordinances adopted but not now included, not currently, you know, worked into the Muni code. And I don't know, have we looked at, Tony, are we going to continue to use Muni code?
Yeah.
We are? Okay.
Yeah, they update every quarter or 6 months. We just have to, like the clerk, the interim clerk found out is from, I think, 22 to president. All of those updated ordinances were never submitted
Right.
to Muni code to be incorporated. So in this July version, they're all going to be submitted to be updated.
Yeah, and I think
Catch up.
in 2015 or 16, we had our much delayed 10-year review of the ordinances. There was somebody actively in the clerk's office going through each one of the pages and adding stuff to the hard copy anyway, and presumably our electronic copies as well.
And that 10-year review is in the charter, currently ongoing.
Yeah.
I guess the reason I ask is because if we're talking about making this available to the public in a hard copy, how much work does it take to keep it updated and make it available? So that if I go to the library and I read it, am I reading an obsolete copy, or sections that are obsolete, or? Well,
You know, I think that's a great question. And the illustration is that from 2022, we didn't submit. So I think it's very easy to keep it up if you keep it up. If you get a giant pile of ordinances that you haven't bothered to submit to be included, that's when it becomes a problem.
Yeah.
And so if we have a policy in the city that says when the council passes the ordinance and it becomes effective, it is put it in the mail and get it to Muni code or whatever we do. Then that's followed, then it's no big deal at all. You know, somebody gets a new copy that they got to plug in at page 43, you know, at
You
the,
don't reprint
at
the
the
whole thing.
library or the, one of the assistant clerks.
I think that's important that it is as policy like you referenced, because there's also the chance that for it to be a defense, if we put within the charter that everything shall be updated within 6 months, for example, and we fail to do it administratively for whatever given reason, that becomes a defense to violations of that ordinance. Let's say it was criminal in nature. To say, well, but I couldn't have been made aware of it. The city was required to update it on their website within 6 months and they didn't. So I should be, so I can't be held to be responsible for a crime.
Yeah, and even, when you choose a date, you choose a time frame, 6 months. It sounds like it's a real long time. And I think that we should be able to get things done, but we're still struggling to get the changes required by proposal one finished. And we wanted to make sure that we moved all the rental stuff into a single location. And that requires us also to eliminate the rental stuff from chapter 6, which is.
And also to make the changes in public meetings, so that you
Right.
gotta wait for the next meeting in the
You
public.
had to go to housing commission, it was reviewed, some of these had to be reviewed by the planning commission. So the 6 months sounds like it's an easy thing to accomplish, and it isn't always that.
It's better than what we had or don't have.
Well, and
Right.
it's a city manager, so this is, I know you're not brand new, but these are this is bringing up and cleaning up processes. And I know that this is librarians' work, this is what librarians do, and I did a lot of digital library kind of work, and you always put the pending changes are right there. So you go through the pending changes to the document where they haven't been appended. You could easily make sure they're since, right up front.
Putting the processes.
Right.
Well, I'd be fine with the 6 months. Because at least it moves it along compared to what we've got now. But it's about 4 years.
Yeah, it wasn't prioritized clear. That's.
So like Mark, you would need council would pass a policy resolution to make sure the policy resolutions. It's in the book. Or is that just a normal?
When we upgrade, there's a list of policy resolutions on the website, and we would sort of call those and, perhaps add some back in that were historic, that might be useful, but that would depend on how the definition may be improved in the charter as to what is a policy.
In chapter 8, we add that the charter and all ordinances, paper copies, will be available at City Hall, the library, and the center. And we add to that ordinance that the city will communicate the access to information policies and procedures annually to the citizens.
Oh, I like that.
And we rescind whatever this is, 6.5.
That could be hold up on the hands. So,
Okay,
I know.
throwing out what people want it.
Yeah, I like that wording. I might even say instead of 6 months, we could say in a timely manner. And so the argument, so when you had your good answer, well, we're doing modifications of numbering, it's going in front of a bunch of committees, that's just a timely manner. But somebody's like, yeah, I don't know why it took so. That's not timely, right? If you've got, reasons why it took so long, like, there's no reason why we weren't sending those updates to the.
Yeah.
There was
a
we had a huge transition.
Right.
I mean,
But
we're
that
talking-
would not count as a timely manner, that would not count as.
I mean, nobody was there.
Yeah, it wasn't anybody doing it.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
I like your idea. Timely seems reasonable because it could be.
What does that mean?
Well, that means I've got a reason why I sat on it for 7 months, or there's no reason why you sat on it for not you, because it wasn't you, but they sat on it for 2 years, that's not acceptable. That's not time, and there's no effort being made to make it happen, there's not a reason it took 6 months, it's just everybody left it, nobody bothered.
I mean, it could be bad. I think it could be bad. That's what you're saying.
And I'm assuming a lawyer, but we're talking about an argument in court. So we're talking about someone being able to say, well, I didn't, I was able to do this because the information wasn't available to me. And you said it was going to be available in 6 months, what's 6 months? So the same argument could be made that it wasn't updated in a timely manner, and you say, well, it wasn't updated for these reasons. But if it wasn't updated for those reasons, we were in trouble. Right? Like,
The same manager just told us what we thought was timely.
well, then
Well,
you
they
just,
fell apart,
well,
right?
lying is an option, that it all goes to.
Just note that, it's not unusual for, in legal work, to have a reasonable time frame attached to some activity that you have to perform. And that doesn't stop somebody from arguing that wasn't a reasonable time period frame. And it pretty much requires anybody who has the duty to document, the time frame and what was happening during that time frame, which is also a matter of transparency to the public that, we're really doing our job, even though it seems like it took a long time. It's one of those things that I think.
Yeah, let's say Unico, we submit our request, we will see them reflected in 6 months, in the meantime, pending changes are.
Well, and going back to Mark's point, there's a section on the website under codes that said recently adopted ordinances. Those are the ones that have not yet been incorporated into Muni code, but they are on the website. So you can see them, but if you go to Muni code, they won't recognize.
And there is the last update, you can see
Yeah.
the last update, but you always want to look for that.
But that requires the reader to put it into context.
Right.
Like to go to the Muni code, see what's been changed or how it impacts other provisions.
Understood.
It's a hard thing to do unless it's already been incorporated.
Oh, sure.
That distinction that you made earlier, that we should educate the public about this distinction. We should have it somewhere.
And the locate here is what the deal is, transparently communicating to the citizenry where they are. That pending changes will be found here,
I made a proposal.
another chill.
Jill, would your proposals that go on the whiteboard for next time or be incorporated in the draft or something like that?
Right,
Into eight,
yeah.
if anybody's.
That get written up somewhere so we can.
Tell me about it.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're still working on these.
Yeah, I know, it wasn't, it didn't flow.
Can you say that again?
Not, no.
We'll have to go back to the online version when this gets posted.
So you write something up.
I did not come up to the date.
It should be posted tomorrow or early next week, once I send it off to the communications team, they get to it as soon as they can.
Annually, we'll communicate to the citizens about how to access information. And that all ordinances and charter will be available in paper form at the library, city hall, and or maybe Anna.
So 6.5,
Online's already in there.
6.5 had the code, which the ordinance is charter, but also resolutions. So should resolutions not be available, or are there too few resolutions, too many?
There's too many.
Yeah.
the policy resolutions, because they're required to be numbered. They're
They're one
numbered for a
document.
reason. And those are, the policy resolutions are also on the website as policies.
So maybe it's policy resolution, not all resolutions.
Other resolutions should not be in there. They are currently, they're scattered in. They shouldn't be in. That way people know that if they go to a policy resolution, it governs how the city operates in some way. So
Like an example of policy resolution would be the internal FOIA document we looked at earlier this year. I think that was one.
well, it wasn't. We originally did that through a policy resolution. And then George issued an administrative order. So one of the questions would be, actually, Tony, but, okay, probably the administrative order has the same force of effect as the policy resolution, but what's the better way of us doing this? That's it.
Yeah, I have the question too, sort of just as part of that too, like, what's the legal effect of the administrative order versus the policy resolution? if there is one, or is it just?
I don't know that there's necessarily a legal distinction other than because to the extent they create the ability of an individual to have a cause of action or file a lawsuit, it would solely be to enforce that the city enforces it. Right, so whether the city, but if you file a suit, say the city's not following policy resolution 1964-1 or their policies regarding whatever it's got as a policy. I mean, the effect is still the same. A judge could potentially require us to follow that to the extent it's in place.
So if the only distinction that I can see is that on the transparency issue, a policy resolution is published. It's available. It's on our website. If you want to find an administrative order, be my guest. Where the hell it is, but it's out there somewhere.
Who has the authority to issue an administrative order?
Yeah, presumably the same.
It's just city manager, whereas policy resolutions come from solely council.
To the council.
Okay, so there are two different things.
Well, it isn't an administrative order, like an operational directive.
Right, it is. And you know, what we have done, the city manager is the FOIA administrator. So I think that was the theory on the administrative order. But that administrative order replicates policy resolution that was passed by the city council.
Yeah.
I just can't imagine. There's paper copies of every resolution since the dawn of time.
Not resolutions, but
That's,
since the amount of time, there should be a copy
I didn't pay.
of the policy resolutions. They are numbered resolutions
and there's
by
paper
year.
copies of them.
by year
Yeah,
and
it's building it.
issue.
Lives.
It's their wet rate.
You know, and you'll see, you know, some years there's like one policy resolution. In other years, that was a council that really loved to do policy resolutions. So they're like, a dozen or 18 or something.
So the language that's being removed, 6.5, put in 8, contain resolutions still, but it should be defined as policy resolutions. Yeah.
I think there's the charter currently makes reference to resolutions and policy. I think you still need to do that to show that there's a distinction between the two of them. The question is, how do you sort of further define a policy resolution so it's clear those are the things we keep in number, and the other ones, they're published in the minutes, but you know, they're not kept forever as a number of resolutions.
So resolution recognizing the 1984 East Lansing baseball team is not numbered,
Right.
even though I would consider that a resolution.
That's-
That is not a resolution under your definition of a policy.
Right, and I might note that a motion to approve something is a resolution, you know.
But
Like the law.
that would be in a packet in hard copy in the basement. If they
I
passed
just
it.
didn't.
Yeah, no, I
I don't
know.
want,
I
I don't
know
want the resolution papers.
until somebody
filled with
FOIAs it.
The paper copies.
That's what I'm saying. So to make the paper copies available, are we defining only policy resolutions as available?
Yes.
Not there, down there, guys.
Single document then, is it numbered?
Yeah, it's numbered, you know, like
So it's a single document. as opposed to-
2025 dash 4. But I don't want to mislead, you know, all resolutions are published in somewhere. They're in the minutes or they're, you know,
But did you say resolutions are mentioned in different parts of the charter?
yeah, I thought, you know, city legislation, I think, section.
Just reflects resolution.
6.1 only says resolution.
Yeah, that's not.
Make a distinction.
Yeah. Oh, fine, but
That's because it is the city council's policy resolution that creates the distinction.
the resolution that created a distinction of resolution.
Yes. That's a like. 1964.
Fire hydrants.
That's the first policy, it's involved water down here.
So I'll try to after this meeting, get all of this into chapter 8, we'll have to have some discussion.
Have a draft with next meeting, so that's actually.
I don't think it's like that.
Okay, I'll do it.
Is there any more discussion on section 6.5?
Just to mention that if you look at 6.1D, that's the distinction where the city council policy resolution draws a distinction between a resolution that's a motion and a resolution which has the effect of
Find an ordinance or something?
that shall be identified by the year in which it passed sequential number equal to the number of resolutions passed in each year, including the resolution in question, general subject matter and the date of passage. And it's related to state or federal law that matters pertaining to the internal affairs or concerns of the city government. So that's what we did in the policy resolution passed by the council. That is what a policy resolution refers to, internal affairs of the city, how we operate, as opposed to the official action of the council in the form of a motion. I think we can make that distinction or by changing.
Changing the language in chapter 6.
6.1.
Other than the parking lot.
Jill, we're gonna wrap up section 6.5. Did you have anything else you want to discuss? Anybody else? I see none. We'll be moving on to German. Anything else?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Vintage 1920s.
But no, so what I did was after we had discussion about alcohol in chapter 18, I believe, and we modified our section to be a very simple sentence. I pulled up Grand Rapids and Ann Arbor, and I wanted to show you what they say, because they maintain, more information than a simple sentence that I didn't know if we wanted to go back.
Right, and their legacy for prohibition. Until the results of the federal census of 1920 is published, the city will grant,
Right.
X number per population based on. So, yeah, it's funny to think, oh yeah, I was going to write something
I thought it was important to, Ann Arbor's was very
brief.
brief, which was, I think, the intent of what we were trying to do. But Grand Rapids still went into, continuation of a license that
It's
kept.
left
Yeah,
legacy stuff.
Yeah, they left.
The druggist.
Yeah.
The fact they call them stones, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Saloons or salons, aren't they? So I mean.
The Ann Arbor one refers to a common drunkard, which is always something I've heard too often.
But it's a little more descriptive, maybe change of terminology than what we had put in our sentence. So I didn't know if we wanted to go back to that. I have not seen the resolution making that change. I think we made it on the night, right?
We made it last meeting.
Yeah.
Sure.
I have it printed, just it was not uploaded yet because I haven't been signed by Dan.
So I just wanted to share those other college towns and what they do with alcoholic beverage regulations in their training. That's it. You should follow.
Well, it really looks like it's the state law prevails.
Yeah.
The only difference that I'm seeing that's jumping out at me is the Ann Arbor title of controlled substances, and they include the provision about marijuana restrictions. And maybe, I like the idea that we're keeping things more simple here and, you know, referencing state law, but maybe it's worth, in case anybody looks at it, going to chapter 18 and retitling it controlled substances. And then referencing the, not just alcoholic beverages, but it's lawful for any person, you know, to give away or furnish controlled substances as defined by state law, and cite those chapters. So that if there's a modification that's made to state law, we need to comply with it. Doesn't get us in the weeds about controlled substances, but we really haven't said anything in the city charter in our proposed revisions about marijuana. And we've got a lot of dispensaries in this town, and it might not hurt to include that.
I think that would be well received by the public to see a controlled substance category, because we're kind of concerned about, we're stripping out all the rules about alcohol and what that appears. And maybe that would be easily justifiable to say we are looking at all controlled substances and the fact that.
Well, the controlled substances are also governed by state and federal law.
No, I see.
And the relevant one we have it in chapter. chart.
Well, that's it goes for alcohol, then should be just eliminated
Yeah.
that section.
It does.
That we have a second.
We just put the minimum word in.
Controlled substance includes, you know, pharmacies, but also, you know, schedule 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 drugs, I think it's 5 or 6 drugs.
I don't care. It seems to me though that I agree with you, Jeff. I think, and Jill, it seems to me that we either strip it out altogether, but the worry there was what Pam's articulating, that all of a sudden the citizens are going to say, wait a minute, we're not going to control this any longer. Or we leave it in, make it a little more inclusive and saying for all controlled substances, we're defaulting to state and federal law. And
So I had an idea, I never proposed it, maybe it's gonna be one of those whiteboard things, but, and I'm sure this is not gonna be a good idea for some people, but, you know, the city gets money off the marijuana licenses that we didn't get years ago. It's approximately
It's
$60,000 license, 59,000 last year or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, it crossed my mind that maybe we could say that money should go to something very specific. I originally was thinking like the water bill, water poverty stuff, or I did a
We
little
put it to the 54 district court for us.
council probably directing where that money goes, yeah, right? So, but if we wanted to say, hey, you wanna take that money and try to alleviate some problem, you can do something like that, then that's maybe just getting too micromanaging, and controlling. Maybe the council should just have the authority to choose what to do with that money. But, you know, other communities are doing different things with it.
I think it's a great idea. The community decides, but I think that putting it in the charter limits the amount of flexibility that we would have, that the city council might have. I think it's a great idea, Jeff. I just think that at some point, and maybe the drug courts need it. At another point, maybe, you know, the city council decides that maybe some other, it might be better directed to some other way.
Could be business grants or whatever.
Right.
But you could say any money generated from these licenses go towards substance abuse prevention and not specify where.
Or substance use service.
Yes, or something, I don't know. And then that could be through the fire department, could be through the courts, it could be through the police department. Any different.
Do we want to get down that detailed in this?
That seems like a recommendation.
I think we bring this
Yeah,
up at
maybe
the
it's a recommendation.
next meeting when everyone else is here.
Yeah.
And look at
Whiteboard it.
whatever. It's sort of-
Yeah.
That's a good idea. Yeah, there's no further discussion. Is there a motion to adjourn? Moved. Second? Yeah, there's someone else second. Let's, all right, all
All in favor, aye.
those in favor say aye.